So, we had a wonderful afternoon yesterday, and I'm sure today will be just as entertaining. And David's given the introductions, so I think the most appropriate thing for me to do, actually, why don't Tom, why don't you kick it off with a couple of readings? They won't be the only readings,
okay,
but whatever you think is appropriate to saying hello.
Before I kick it off,
yes.
I notice I'm the only person here who doesn't know how to use the microphone. So, thank you.
Is that better?
That's much better. Yeah, okay. Otherwise, I feel like I'm looking up into my mother's face. It's very disconcerting since she only has one eye. Well, anyway, I just want to say I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a huge fan of Wes's, and of course I'm a huge fan of Kristin Hersh, and obviously of David Daniel. So, great to be here, and let me read something. I thought I'd start with a poem that maybe keys off. Kristin has a song which has, it's not vodka, it's not even chocolate, right? Yeah. So this poem is called January Night, and it's called, it's about vodka. The vodka, getting literary, can't recall it exactly. Something about death loneliness that waits at the end of every wasted day. Stumbling around the house, facing itself down, the vodka, bless its heart, keeps getting in my way. That there isn't the slightest hope that tomorrow the glass will be wiped clean is none of its concern. And no matter how deep down I look into its clarity, it stays absolutely clear of me. Maybe that's why I love to drink it, because it doesn't know about me. My fears, my loves that seem like fears, the whole overblown phenomenon of thinking I'm worth noticing. So cold and clear and surgical, the vodka turns to steel and cuts whatever is most tender. And as the operation's going on, it pours itself unstintingly in this snow-lit hush in which all trace of me is gone, but for this welcome stinging down my throat. And when I come to, and it's not back to who I was, or at least not exactly, I feel such fragile clarity. Right now, balanced between my knees, it's content to sit here with me and let light pass through it endlessly. Wow.
I like the way you said keying off, yeah. Because I would like to announce to my students that I never want to hear in my class again, going off of. That's what people say when somebody sticks their hands and says, going off of. I just don't want to hear that anymore. Keying off is a better phrase.
Okay. And I'll read another one, a little shorter one.
How about Fable? Have you got Fable handy?
Fable, sure. Yeah.
A request?
Is Fable in this book?
I heard it on a splendid podcast.
Fable, okay. You know, the horrible thing about having written a lot of books is that often, I can't remember which one it's in. It must be in that one. And if it's not in that one, it must be in this one.
I know what albums my songs are on, Tom. And I know what books your poems are in.
Ah, great. Thank you. I knew this. I just wanted to give Wes a moment. Okay, Fable. This actually came out of going to a demonstration back when there were such things against the Iraq War. Anyway, you know, demonstrations are always so earnest, and so it's wonderful when someone comes up with a new kind of protest sign. Fable. A little village in Texas has lost its idiot. read the caption on a protest sign. But where, oh, where is the holy idiot, truth teller and soothsayer, familiar of spirits, rat eater, unhouselled wanderer whose garble and babble fill rich and poor, homeless and housed, with awe and fear? Is he hiding in the pit of the walkie-talkie, its grid of holes insatiably hungry, almost like a baby, sucking in the police sergeant's quiet voice as he calls in reinforcements? Oh, holy idiot, is that you sniffing the wind for the warm turd smell on the mounted policemen, backing their horses' quivering skittish haunches into the demonstrators' faces? Oh, little village among the villages, the wild man, the holy bedlamite is gone, and nobody now knows where to find him. Lying in mud, lying caked in mud, hair elfed into knots. Some poor mad Tom roving the heath for a warm, soft place to lay his body down, his speech obsessed with oaths, demons, his tongue calling forth the foul fiend, flibbertigibbet, as the horses back slowly, slowly into the crowd, and he eats filth. He crams his ravenous mouth with filth. And then he sits on his stool in the trampled hay and deep-rutted mud. He anoints himself with ashes and clay. He puts on his crown of fumitor weed and holds his scepter of a smoldering poker and calls the court to order.
Kristin is going to read a little bit from her memoir, Rat Girl.
This is actually my teenage diary. I published it. Not something I recommend doing. When I was a teenager, my best friend was a woman in her 60s named Betty Hutton, who claimed to have been a big movie star when she was younger. And she actually was. She was massive. I thought she was nuts.
She was in Preston Sturgis movies, wasn't she?
Yeah, and her friends really were Cary Grant and Judy Garland. I just thought she was crazy, which was okay because that was funnier and sort of sweeter. Like she had made up a world, but she didn't make anything up. But she used to come to my band shows and give me showbiz advice. Far from everyone, huddled in a corner of the club, are Betty and her priest. I've never asked her why she brings her priest to shows, but he's always there. I know they're very close. They're sort of dating, spiritually. And they never miss a show. It's funny, like every day is bring your grandma and her priest to work day. Betty can't even pronounce the name of the band. She says throwing muses is too many syllables. I told her Betty Hutton has just as many, but she ignored me. Tonight, Betty's wig is gold, and she's wearing her blue cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. Her priest is dressed as a priest. The two of them lean against the back wall of the club, talking. Betty has gigantic sunglasses on because she doesn't like being recognized. When we play gay bars, she and her priest look like a couple of nifty drag queens. But in this dismal rock club, they look small and lonely, out of place. It's sad that this is their big Friday night out on the town. There are probably better things for an old lady and her priest to do on a Friday night. But Betty thinks she has to come to all of our shows because I need help. This is sort of true. She says I'm a reluctant performer, also true. And that she can learn me up to sparkle. This will never happen. Betty grew up in the golden age of Hollywood, back when movies were Broadway on film, so her idea of music is singing as entertainment. And you can't call what I do singing or entertainment. I hiss and yell and wail. Sometimes I make seagull noises, unfortunately. Music is something I have almost no control over, like well-rehearsed Tourette's. When Betty sings, she sits at a piano and says lovely things about hope and broken hearts. I often sing phonetically, as if I don't speak English. The words climb out of my throat and into my mouth, then I have to spit them out. Betty sings about starlight and champagne. I sing about dead rabbits and blowjobs. When I say playing music is owning violence, she says it's owning love. When I say it's math, she says it's tap dancing. When I say it's my gun, she says it's her dance card. I've also noticed that she sings notes that go with the chords in her songs. I have yet to do that. It sounds pretty when Betty does it. It sounds boring and goofy when I do it, so I make up new notes, ones that don't belong anywhere near the chords I'm playing, and I sing those. People must think, it's so nice of them to let that deaf girl sing.
Deaf girl, sing.
That didn't feel good. You know how it feels when the real world encroaches, rubbing elbows with the unemployed and you. You're so beautiful, you're so good. Eating mangoes on a fold-out couch. I am scooped out. You're inscrutable. You're all mine. Slipping is a dude, wide opens your mind. Your guitar's a race car, sex is your best friend. What's your dirty answer? What's your dirty answer? What's your dirty answer? My fantasies are unlived histories. You know what it's like when mistakes go unmade. It was beautiful, it was you, and it ain't ugly, ugly. I thought it made pretty, and be goddamned. This is beautiful, oh my. Swimming is a lewd, wine opens your mind. Your guitar's a race car, sex is your best friend. What's your dirty answer? What's your dirty answer? What's your dirty answer? I don't judge people, I just watch them. No, it's time to look away. I wanna look away now. Somebody's coming. I don't wanna live backward. I don't wanna even look backward. It's not my fault. It's not my fault you don't love me. It's not my fault. It's not my fault you don't love me when I'm drunk. I'm wiped. I'm so tired. I'm so tired. Carry me for a little while. 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 you.
Fantastic.
Thank you, sweetie.
What do you look at when you're looking over there? What do you,
Space.
is it just because, are you seeing what you're seeing?
No. If there's something there, it's a problem. I can't play with it.
So you just find a dead space and
Sometimes
look down.
people stand right there.
Of course they do.
Well, why would you want that? Screaming at them.
Because they like your music.
Why would they do that?
Well, Kristin tweeted me earlier today and said, when are what do you say? When are lyrics poetry? It's an interesting question. About definition of terms and things like that. Of course, there's a lot of that. But, you know, when are lyrics poetry? I suggested when they're not being sung. I mean, which sounds dumb, but on the other hand, that's when they're just sitting on the page. So I'm going to do something I've never done before, which is read an incredibly short, whatever it is, which, funnily enough, I wrote upstairs a couple of weeks ago. Now, and then we'll talk about poems and lyrics. I don't care whether this is a poem or a lyric, and I suggest it doesn't matter ultimately whether it is, but because it doesn't have a tune at the moment. So it's called Let's Evaporate, and it's actually going off of what you said. Because it's got a bit of
off?
It's going off because it's got a bit of vodka in it. It's very short, and I've never read a poem in my life. So, wet clothes on the laundry line, a couple of hours, they'll be dry. There's no need to wait. Let's evaporate. Glass of vodka overnight, half gone in the morning light. I give in to fate. Let's evaporate. We are water, you and me, turning into air. Falling back down to the earth, who knows where. A thief has robbed the wine-dark sea. All that's left is salt and lees. Before it gets too late, let's evaporate. I'm sorting out all my receipts. Rewind, review, relive, repeat. Let's make a date to evaporate. We are vapor, you and me, a disappearing act, rising in the atmosphere and falling back. I've had enough of tough crowds. Let's escape into the clouds. We could hibernate or evaporate. So that's a little poem. When is a poem a lyric? When is it? I mean, you've got to sing one and not the other. Have you written ever lyrics for people?
Never consciously. I mean, I have a poem that takes off from Mary Hamilton, you know, the old Scots Border ballad.
Right.
And it is a ballad measure. You know, I had an old...
Does it rhyme? Regular rhyming?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I had an old teacher years ago in Baltimore, actually. And Billie Holiday was just at the end of her career, and he said that he went... I don't know if this story is true. This is one of those stories which is probably not true, but it'd be great if it was true. But anyway, he said he went to the... club where Billie Holiday was performing in Baltimore, really at the end of her life, and her voice was shot in those days, and people really didn't know who she was. And at the break, it had been the custom where she was always given flowers. Somebody in the audience would always give her flowers. So he knew this, and so he bought the flowers, and he came back several nights. And so finally she said she wanted to meet this guy. And so she met the guy, and he said, well, I'm a poet. And she said, well, why don't you write me some lyrics? And he said, okay. And she said, now, you know the difference between a song and a poem, don't you? And he said, no. And she said, well, I don't want many words, and I don't want them long. And I thought about that. And I've often thought about that, you know, in terms of just that question. I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, Gilbert and Sullivan obviously don't do that.
Well, yeah, and also... you know, I mean, I think I finally worked out the difference between a rock song and a novel.
Oh, okay.
You know, that finally having experience in both fields.
But it's absolutely true. I'm asked to do poetry readings, and I get tense because there aren't enough guitar solos in them. You know, I don't know how to paint that way. And I'm also worried that I'll start singing them because they are phonetic melody to me. They're one of the instruments, and that instrument is playing syllables.
It seems to me that you are a very interesting special case because because not only are you doing something that is quite unself-conscious and not like a lot of other people do it, that is uniquely you, but also you have the mental ability to explain what it is that you do.
Oh,
You know what I
that's a
mean?
nice
It
thing
seems
to
to me
say.
that a lot of people who kind of do the things you do, if you speak to them about it, might not be able to explain it. In other
Right.
words, what I'm saying is, you know, you're both clever and doing something very instinctual at the same time. It is,
It's a
isn't
very
it?
visceral process.
Yeah.
And my problem is that when I try to be articulate about it, it's so objective that it almost has nothing to do with it anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
The craft is very invisible to me. The inspiration directs it to the point where I don't really remember what happened.
I love talking about like ideas. So, you know, you said you saw the sign at the protest.
Right.
Right, for that particular one. But let's think, and I heard you talking about another thing that was the space station poem that I really liked.
Sure.
You were talking about having seen Solaris by Tarkovsky.
Right.
But so what was the last song, say, and what was the last poem? What was the moment at which you went, oh, that's something happening, that's an idea, that's a thing that's occurred, and I am going to do something. I can't help but do something
That's what
with
I
that.
lack. I lack that moment. There is no idea. For me, an idea is something so removed from the song as to already be confused. If it's my brain that's involved, then I've already screwed something up.
Yeah.
I need to shut up
So you
more.
just pick up a guitar and start
It's
bashing away.
before the guitar, the
Right.
song is, and it's. I assume that there's a piece of clay somewhere that's being chipped away, but I don't feel like I'm the one deciding what the statue is. I'm listening for that.
Right. And so you might come up with a little, and perhaps you don't even want to think about it, but you might come up with a little musical phrase in your head first.
The song is there fully formed.
And so so is it almost like you could just make it up on stage?
Oh, if I weren't so shy, I suppose. There's a process. It takes about 24 hours of listening while the song refines itself into instruments that I understand. And probably the last instrument, as you say, is the phonetic melody that I come to know as syllables. And they are beautiful and therefore necessary to me. I don't think this is what I want to say. I wait and see what the song said, and sometimes I figure it out. Sometimes I just hope that beautiful is always necessary.
Well, I think in a lot of songwriting, even like I mean, I'm a fairly, you know, I need it all to make sense kind of person. But I mean, even me, there's fantastic amounts of gibberish in it because it gets the word where you just want the words to do the thing that they have to do to kind of get you to the next bit that makes sense. So maybe your whole music is
I
like the
that,
connecting
though.
bits.
I think it fools you. I like rhyming for that reason. I like meter because I think it tricks you into saying what you mean.
I
And
completely agree.
We're not real cool saying what we mean for the most part.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Tom, last idea.
Well, I'm a lot like Kristin in the sense that, you know, it's mainly flying by the seat of your pants. But I think I had but it's odd because you never know where these things are going to end up. I was walking down, I'd just been to a hospital and you get myself checked out for this, that, and the other thing. And I was walking down and there's a Catholic church and my friend, Mary Carr, she's a memoirist. Anyway, Mary was sitting on the steps of the Catholic Church waiting to go into Mass. And so I said, oh, hey, Mary, and we talked for a moment, and then, you know, I'm not a believer, and she's a fervent believer, and so we sort of joke about that, and at a certain point, I said, see you later, Mary. Kiss the priest for me. And she said, have a good time, you godless bastard. And I have to say, I was so cheered by being called a godless bastard that I thought to myself, I have to write a poem in which I foreground the fact that I'm a godless bastard. And none of that ever made it into the poem. But that was really the last time where I actually knew, oh, I just got a gift. Because it elated me. I was so happy to finally realize that somebody who believed, you know, understood my essential inability to believe and had made a joke of it. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. I mean, and none of it was very conscious. So, I mean, I wrote this really short poem based on it, you know. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think of it as
And
a
what
heightened
Kristin, you were
state,
saying.
not a thing.
Yeah. And I don't have any kind of, I have a kind of brute sense of where the poem, I listen a lot too. It's not. I never think will gets me anywhere, and I certainly don't have any discipline. In a sense, I don't think discipline really works.
People assume that about poets, though, don't they? They assume that songwriters just, put on their lucky bathrobe and sit down at the piano with a cup of coffee.
But they think poets are disciplined and...
No, I think they
they're
assume
wild
poets aren't.
characters, right? Yeah,
Well, no. I mean, it's the discipline comes in. It's all pleasure. It doesn't have anything to do with will. The reason why I sit down and work every day is because I'm incredibly excited to be in the presence of all these strange voices that are coming at me, and you have to make your way through this incredible maze to actually get out to the end. And of course, the thing that you have to hold on to, like you say, are the syllables. Like, in your poem, you had the rhymes to hold on to. Yeah. And you said,
funny.
And rhyme does sort of, like both of you said, it sort of opens you up, and then suddenly you can find something which you never would have gotten to otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I think the pleasure analogy, I mean, you're doing it because, so many times when we're having these discussions, it comes back to people actually aren't making any of the aesthetic conscious decisions that in universities one kind of teaches that, say, Edith Wharton is doing in Ethan Frome. In fact, much of the time, people are doing the only things that they can do and are good at doing. And it's amazing how many of these conversations come back to, that's what I like. I do what I love because I like doing it, and I don't seem to be able to do it any other way. And I'm very lucky that thing that I do at one point was a thing that culture decided was worth listening to, or in Mark Morris's case, looking at, or in your, or reading or whatever. And it's so funny that it's a series of discussions that happens in an academic environment. But in the end, the conclusions are so often not far from academic conclusions. But what I was thinking about, what you said about pleasure, was my stepfather, who is old now, does those cryptic crosswords like they have in England.
Yeah.
Not the where you synonym crossword, but a cryptic one. And he sits in his chair, and that's pleasure for him for 2 hours. That would drive me nutso. But doing what I do is so incredibly similar to doing that crossword. Yeah. It's just I don't have a grid and no one set it for me, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm finding words and putting them next to each other and making them so by at the end of it, it's done.
But
somehow.
It's an honor too. I don't know if crossword puzzle is an honor.
That's a separate issue. I'm the guy who actually dresses up to do a bit of writing. I definitely consider it.
You dress up to do a bit of anything.
I do. Any excuse, it's true. But I actually think, I read somewhere that Keats used to wear a 3-piece suit to do a bit of poetry writing. And so at that moment, I decided, next time I go into a recording studio, I'm going to wear a 3-piece suit. Because I
heard
think
it was lighting
candles.
Maybe that's the chick version.
Yeah, you're lighting candles.
You have to honor the sphere of your work or something.
It sounds very womanly.
It does, yeah.
I just like to sit down with unshaven, unshowered, and half asleep.
Not even a candle, dude?
Forget it.
It's actually Twyla Tharp that needed candles, I think.
Twyla Tharp needs a lot of... Well.
Poem, song? Poem first, song
poem,
second.
Sure, whatever.
Poem first, song second.
I'm going to do something, You want me to read that Space Station poem?
I think it's a fantastic poem, and I'm sure everybody would love to hear it.
Okay.
These people are walking out because they have
class.
Oh,
not the Space Station
because
poem.
You have class, right?
Really, it's great. You're going to love it. It's only 300 lines long. All right. I will dedicate this to Wes.
Oh, it's so kind of you.
Yeah. Does your mother like dogs?
No, not at all.
Does your mother like dogs?
My mother?
Yeah.
I guess.
My mother detests all pets.
My mother loves dogs. So my mother always has a dog. I always find dogs really disconcerting, though, because whenever you look into a dog's eyes and the dog looks right back into your eyes and you think, is this really man's best friend? I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking or she's thinking.
There was something that I heard that there's something important for the understanding of the poem about the space station and its movement and how it goes back around. That's what the guy... Yeah. What is that?
Briefly, I'm a child of the Cold War, and my father ran a drive-in movie theater first, and then when television came along, he got in the ground floor of the space race. So all of this stuff is in my blood. So the Tarkovsky movie is on the one hand. On the other hand is the garden hose, a little rocket which you would screw onto it and turn up the pressure, and boom, it would go up in the air. And this comes out of the latter impulse, I think. Anyway, my mother's kitchen is a space station. That's her cooking style. And space stations make gravity by revolving, and then at a certain point they reverse. At least that's my understanding of it. And then during the moment when they reverse, everything floats and it's weightless. Space station. My mother and I and the dog were floating weightless in the kitchen. Silverware hovered above the table. Napkins drifted just below the ceiling. The dead who had been crushed by gravity were free to move about the room, to take their place at supper, lift a fork, knife, spoon. A spoon, knife, fork that, outside this moment's weightlessness, would have been immovable as mountains. My mother and I and the dog were orbiting in the void that follows after happiness of an intimate gesture, her hand stroking the dog's head, and the dog looking up, expectant, into her eyes. The beast gaze, so direct and alienly concerned to have its stare returned. The human gaze that forgets for a moment that it sees what it's seeing and simply fervently sees, but only for a moment. Only for a moment were my mother and the dog looking at each other, not mother or dog, but that look. I couldn't help but think, if only I were a dog, or mother was, then that intimate gesture, this happiness passing, could last forever. Such a hopeful, hopeless wish I was wishing. I knew it and didn't know it, just as my mother knew she was my mother and didn't. And as for the dog, her large black pupils, fixed on my mother's faintly smiling face, seemed to contain a drop of the void we were all suspended in. Though only a dog who chews a ragged rawhide chew toy shaped into a bone, femur or cannon bone, of the heavy body that we no longer labored to lift against the miles-deep air pressing us to our chairs. The dog pricked her ears, sensing a dead one approaching. Crossing the kitchen, my father was moving with the clumsy gestures of a man in a spacesuit. The strangeness of death moving among the living, though the world was floating with a lightness that made us feel we were phantoms. I don't know if my mother saw him. He didn't look at her when he too put his hand on the dog's head, and the dog turned its eyes from her stare to his. And then, the moment on its axis reversed, the kitchen spun us the other way round and pressed heavy hands down on our shoulders, so that my father sank into the carpet. My mother rested her chin on her hand and let her other hand slide off the dog's head, her knuckles bent in a kind of torment of moonscape erosion, ridging up into peaks, giving way to seamed plains, with names like the Sea of Tranquility. Though nothing but a metaphor for how I saw her hand, her empty, still strong hand, dangling all alone in the infinite space between the carpet and the neon-lit ceiling. So,
Sing, deaf girl. Sing.
I'm a mother and I like dogs. That counts, right?
Yeah,
Good.
that's true.
And gravity's a bitch goddess where I'm concerned. Some of the lyrics in this were spoken by other people. It happens to me a lot, especially if they speak in an idiosyncratic manner. Their voice will stick in my head and show up in a song. And this was an old lady on a bus when I was a teenager who told me that she never ever left her house, that she would never leave her house as long as she lived. She was on a bus at the time. I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Well, look what they did to Jesus." She turned up in a song like 20 years later. The sky is a shine with sheen. Those eyes are a great machine. Spare me your whining in my rainy gazebo tree. Deep in my silver pit, the walls are all thick with it. But you slay me in my rainy gazebo tree. Bless my baby eyes. Don't you know Jesus died? I'm better off inside. Strip and you'd lose your hide. What's in that thermos, man? Your female's a garbage can. So you haven't filled her up. Okay, try to fill my cup. It's moonshine from cactus. Well, I guess you can't wreck us. Bless my baby eyes. Oh, don't you know Jesus died? I'm better off inside. Strip and you lose your hide. Bless my baby eyes. Oh, don't you know Jesus died? Spare me your moonshining in my rainy gazebo tree. In my rainy gazebo tree. In my rainy gazebo tree.
I don't know what precisely you want your music to do, or if you have any consideration of the effect that it has. Do you?
I don't think I'm supposed to.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying you're supposed to, but I'm wondering if you do at all.
Well, I would hope that any work would be an idiosyncratic version of something universal. And in that someone could relate. I mean, instead of looking at it as a strange thing over there.
It's something I've been telling my writing students, some of whom are here, that, in the end, all you're left to offer the world is your unique vision. That is your one great gift to the world, is the fact that only you can do it. So, I mean, the more you try and make your work appealing to age group 13 to 16 or to fit a genre of work that may be an easier one to publish or anything like that, the less you it's going to be. And that will, erode the best thing you've got going for you, which is your idiosyncratic vision.
Particularly now, when I first started, that was a big problem. They called me nuts, and the music sounded crazy to people. And I seemed to be closing off perception in that way, and that was disappointing to hear. I had no control over it.
And of course, you and I were signed by the same man.
That's right, yes.
Back in 1907. I mean, I was 1907.
1908 for me.
Yeah. But I wonder, so, what we're getting a picture of Kristin's MO is that, it isn't split up into component parts when you do it. It's all coming together. And when it's going out to people, I think, your music has always casted a spell, sometimes a scary spell, not always a relaxing spell, but a kind of spell over me ever since I first heard your music. And so what I want to do is turn that way and go, do you ever think of that casting a spell version of what your poetry might do? Or is the fact of it is that, the words are, meant to be greatly paid attention to? And or is there you see what I'm saying? Is there a big subconscious relaxing thing when you're writing or reading a poem that you might like the reader to relax into? Or do you want him or her to be very hyper aware of all the component parts and the things you've put into it?
God,
might that possibly end up being the difference between a lyric and a poem a little bit?
Hey.
That was my big idea.
I think all those three things, I would say all of the above. I want this big
You want the big picture?
Yeah, I want this kind of subconscious relaxation. Then but basically, there's a poet who once said that the state you needed to achieve was a perfectly useless concentration in order to write a poem. And I love the idea of being perfectly useless as I'm concentrating. But I think all three of those things are sort of something I would like to have happen. The real problem with writing any kind of poem, I find, is that whatever conscious intention I may have, and I have lots of them, really doesn't help me write the poem. And it's really a more question of like fighting through the unconscious intentions to get actually to the words themselves, because the words themselves, they aren't abstractions to me. They have a certain kind of heft. They've got plastic qualities in the same way you talked about clay, and I actually think that that's how poems actually present themselves to me. No matter how abstract the ideas in the poem are, they never present themselves to me as abstractions.
Right.
They're always being weighed for kind of tone or some kind of vowel music or consonantal music. It really is utterly instinctive, and it is very much about music. I'm very much a guy who can't write unless I have it in my ear, and I can't write unless I have some kind of rhythmic impulse that's moving the poem forward, an impulse that I don't want to control, but which I've got to hear, and if I can't hear it, I can't do it. But that's just one of the things that I've learned over the years, is that A, you can't will it, and B, that if you sit down at the desk and do it, you're going to increase your chances of actually getting into that perfectly useless state of concentration. If you don't sit down at the desk and do it, you'll never do it.
Do you work on the poem after it's born?
I work on poems. I revise hugely sometimes. I'll have 100, 200 drafts sometimes. Because I have to, because I'm stupid. and I have to trust that kind of stupidity, because there's a certain kind of part of me which, there's nothing worse in poetry, I find, than good writing. Good writing bores the pants off of me. I don't want to read good writing. Good writing is not poetry to me. There's got to be some other place. It's like you're writing a poem, and then suddenly, it's like you're in an elevator shaft, and you go straight down into this place, and you feel like all the G-force is beginning to gather, and it's incredibly exciting. And you say, "Am I going to hit bottom?" And the Eliot, a wonderful, wonderful writer. All kinds of problematic things about his political views and whatnot. But he did say many wonderful things. But in an unguarded moment, he said, well, you want to write things all the way to the bottom. And then there was a long pause, and he said, and the bottom is a long way down. And so I want to go all the way down.
In New Orleans, they call that stinky stuff. It just has to be really rich.
Yeah.
But we have to be immediately concerned with the presentation of our work.
Right.
And it takes years sometimes to produce.
Yeah. See, I never worry about that.
Yeah, that's
I don't give
great.
a damn if I'm a good reader or a lousy reader. I actually can't stand it when actors read poets' poems. I hate it because...
Exactly what I'm doing at Lincoln Center tomorrow evening. Me, Meryl Streep, and a bunch of other people.
I'm sorry.
Reading poetry, man.
But
Guess
I'm
who
doing
won't
one of
be
yours,
there?
and I'm going to screw it up.
Don't worry. If you're doing one of mine, it won't be acting. No, but actors kind of... I don't like slick. I hate slick. I detest slick. That's not why I'm a poet. That's not why I started to write poems. Slick bores me. I can't stand it. And so much of popular music is about slick.
Oh, it's horrible.
And that's why I loved your music when you came. I mean, and your music is great because I suddenly understood why David put me together with Kristin Hersh, and I thought, yeah, there's something.
We're the anti-slick.
Yeah, the anti-slick.
Well, I mean, if there's going to be, I mean, there's lots of common ground, but that's clearly one of the places. I mean, I couldn't even think of a musician who represents the whole package of what pop stardom represents than you. And what I was also thinking while you were saying that thing about the words and everything is, surely one definition of poetry on some level must be, and I'm not talking about what it really is, but must be that when the words are down on the page, they, with any luck, mean slightly more than they would where they are in the line on the page than if it was prose or journalism or something. That must be some basic definition of poetry. And of course, what makes it very like a lyric, is that a lyric is going to have a musical note to each one, be it one that fits with the chord or one that doesn't fit with the chord, that is going to make that word full of another kind of meaning, whether that word is a nonsense syllable or
I
a
see what you're saying.
sensical
Absolutely.
syllable, right?
Absolutely.
So then
it's like the heaven behind the earth version of the word.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
That's a wonderful way to put it.
Right,
yeah.
it is. So what do you feel about it all being then split into such a nice book and its component parts? Does that feel disappointing to you, or does that feel like this is exactly how it's meant to be? Or am I missing the point and these are completely
Some
separate
of them
bits
fly
of
off the
writing?
page to me, and that means it's a work that works, that should have been born. And some of them...
Explain what this is actually first.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is a lyric book that I wrote with essays that are like prose poetry about songs, getting lamer and lamer by the minute. But it is very visceral because it's called Dancing About Architecture, to try to write about music, so you have to put yourself in a place like that. And some of it I could do every now and then. I'd run into a song that was, quite honestly, like publishing a tuba part of a piece of music.
Yeah.
It's not going to change anybody's life or headspace.
Yeah. And did that come out? That came out before the memoir, right? Did it?
Yes.
It did. So, did somebody? I just want to know this. Did somebody come to you with the idea of the memoir and say that would be a good thing for you to do, maybe, or was that a move that you spearheaded, as it were, and suggested to people?
Sort of. Writers approached me. A fistful of writers asked me if I wanted them to ghostwrite my memoir, and I don't know why. I still don't know why. There must have been a story that came out that made my life sound interesting, but I didn't see it. And I'm really nice. I'm doormat nice, so I just said, sure, do whatever you want. That's so sweet, or whatever. And then I found out they meant hours and hours of interviews, months. A guy threatened to move into my house with me.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm
You're allowed. And so I just said, oh, God, that's not ever going to happen. But that meant there was no book, so I had to write it. And the only book I'd ever written was this old diary. And it was actually very intriguing to look at. It sort of dissolved and then pulled itself together. And it was written in poetic fashion because you can't really help it.
Yeah.
No one is going to read it, you know,
yeah.
and it's just flying out of your pen. So.
Why don't we end, as it were, with a song? Or a little reading if you prefer. It's totally up to you. Maybe a song.
Okay.
And a poem.
Sure,
and while
sure.
while we're settling into that state, if anybody has any questions for when those two things are done and we've applauded them, then I'll answer them.
Can I move into your house?
Yes.
If I walk down this hallway tonight, it's too quiet, so I pass through the dark and call you on the phone. Push your old numbers and let your house ring till I wake your ghost. Let him walk down your hallway. It's not this quiet. Slide out your receiver, sprint across the wire. Follow my number, slide into my hand. It's the blaze across my nightgown. It's the phone's ring. I think last night you were driving circles around me. I think last night you were driving circles around me. I think last night you were driving circles around me. I can't drink this coffee till I put you in my closet. Let him shoot me down, let him call me off. I take it from his whisper, you're not that tough. It's the blaze across my nightgown. It's the phone's ring. Last night you were driving circles around me. I think last night you were driving circles around me. I think last night you were driving circles around me. I think last night you were driving circles around me.
If we had another hour, I think I would want to know. Don't answer this now, but maybe you can sneak it into a question. When somebody asks a question, you can shoehorn the answer to this in there. I think I want to know, because I would really be interested in knowing, how come, you are such an incredibly nice, and I think of you as such a kind and normal, reliable person, and why it is that you have access to this astonishingly kind of primitive and almost unconscious expression of your art. I would just love to know, but it's like it would take
nice compliment,
it would take hours to talk about it. But so think about it. Okay.
All right. I'm not going to read the poem about the sex club.
Do it.
They came here for the sex club poem.
Oh, they did, yeah. Oh, they're leaving already. I when I was thinking about Kristin's Jesus song, I do have one devotional poem in that sense. This is for my an old friend of mine named Tom Gunn. It's called the negative.
He was a poet.
Yeah. Back in those days, when he told me about his adventures in sex clubs, it wasn't the whys and wherefores, but technical details, like going rafting down the Colorado River. And when he wrote about a gay male friend whose first sexual experience was with his stepfather, the friend told him it wasn't weird, but the best possible thing that could have happened. I saw then that God, who I never believed in, was dwelling in my heart as a negative. That the negative had been developed into a picture of a man who stares up at the sky on a day so clear he sees through the mountain shadows to the divinely human-seeming form that climbs it. A neighbor in running shoes and sunglasses jogging up the slope with his dog, tongue panting and slavering, an acute look of happiness in its eyes that could turn at any moment into exhaustion or pain, as in a maze of cubicles called Asshole Alley. Little pyramids of canvas called Lust of the Pharaohs. Different pricing for what you want, depending on the equipment. The air thick with a sour, acidic, head-fogging reek of cum. And my pal, the poet, who believed in infernal chemistry, and the spirit as a kind of spooky action at a distance, he communed with this God, this eternally dying Father of all matter, who made out of our bodies his own maze of cubicles where he hides himself away. His sanctuary, Asshole Alley, where God's own unholy loves bubble all around him like a cauldron in his ears. And my poet pal heard the bubbling. He stirred the pot. He showed me the holy city, the sexual New Jerusalem that came prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. That was how it was in those days. Back when my friend hadn't yet met the coroner, who wrote down his cause of death as polysubstance abuse that brought on his heart attack while fucking. And regardless if I believed, whenever we were together, God shone clear. Those were the days when every morning God woke up in a blur of ecstasy and went to bed every night in divine rage. Whoever loved him, he loved. Whoever hated him, he hated back. For who can doubt the vitality of hate or the volatility of love?
That was awesome.
I'm going to very much assume that you know that John Donne poem, Negative.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty amazing poem.
Very,
I
yeah.
stole that entire thing for a song once. So, any questions? Let's throw it open. Does anybody have any questions of either Kristin or Tom? Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all three of them. Yeah. God, I loved your comment. You're a lot smarter than I am. Yeah, the thing about it is, for me, in that particular line, a knife, fork, spoon, a fork, knife, spoon, So all the utensils are floating in the air. Suddenly you're in this space where the dead can come back because gravity isn't holding them to the ground. Your father comes up out of the carpet again. And one of the things about those kinds of cadences, you're absolutely right. I mean, that poem came to me in 8-line stanzas. And then the idea was, okay, the beauty of the 8-line stanza is that you start here and you're listening down the poem to the 8th line. And so you sort of relax into the 2nd line. And you relax even more into the 3rd line because you got 8 lines to go. So you can really go a lot of different places. And then you start to get tense in the 6th line. You say, how the hell am I going to get out of it? And that makes a kind of rhythm right there. And so it's like Frost say, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. Oh, Jesus. And miles to go before I sleep. You know, so he's a little desperate, so he says, repeat it. It'll be a kind of cadence, but it is, I mean, it's very beautifully emotive what happens in the Frost poem when that happens. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you guys were talking about, you know, words, I mean, one definition of poetry that's always been, you know, I think the best definition I've ever thought of, at least in terms from, you know, I'm sitting down, I'm trying to write the bloody poem, and it sort of goes along with what you're saying about having a cadence to refer to and then an 8-line stanza or something. There's nothing more limiting than infinity. Yeah. I mean, being thrown in the middle of the ocean and then saying to somebody, swim! Which way? But if you've got an 8-line stanza, it's like a life preserver. You know, you can climb into the 8-line stanza and say, okay, I got to shut up after 8 lines. And then I got to start it again. And another 8 lines.
And rhymes the best of all for me.
Yeah. No, because so all these things are happening in your head at the moment. So you've got this kind of, you have this tremendous freedom between the 1st line and the 8th line. And at the same time, you know which way to swim. So I think, you know, and that's one of the things that's why I think of poetry as a kind of quintessentially formal art that goes way beyond, for me anyway, the ideas. I'm not interested in ideas, really. Ideas have never interested me in terms of writing poems. I love ideas and I'm interested in them. But for me, when I'm reading a poem, I feel like what I want to have the feeling like is I'm reaching inside, you know, Frost's mind, or whoever's poem I'm reading, and what I'm getting is I'm actually feeling the texture, you know, the texture of a mind, the texture of a life, and that's what I want to feel when I read a poem. So, but the only way I think you can get to that texture is to have these kinds of patterns, and however way that they're, you know, and however way that they work out, and obviously, you know, Kristin and Wes have different kinds of patterns. And I'm sure when you guys write prose, that you also have a rhythm of the sentence going too.
It's very musical for me. I drove Penguin crazy writing my book because every sentence had to be musical. And then every paragraph had to be a different musical presentation. I didn't know what I was talking about. So I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody else? Going off of that?
Keying off of that.
Isn't that interesting? I also have my other band, 50 Foot Wave, has a half-hour-long piece of music that we released as a record. And my band, Throwing Muses, is doing a 40-song record, and they're all attached just to try to get out of that. And there are a lot of little 15-second pieces. But really, I'm still attracted to that song body construct, and certainly not verse, verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus, but just this idea that it could have 4 limbs and be humble, I suppose, as humble as a monkey's song, you know, and it should not hurt anybody's feelings. And I find that when you play for 20 seconds, it sort of hurts people's feelings. They're like, well, what now? And then also, if you play half an hour, it hurts their feelings even more.
And there are some songwriters, you know, who just, you know, like Paul McCartney, after he'd written all those perfect pop songs for the Beatles that were just, you know, always the right length and the right time. It seems to me like for the next 10 years he couldn't write anything longer than 30 seconds long, and he'd just bang them all together and make singles out of them. And that's what Live and Let Die is. And that's what, you know, so many of those songs are just these little bits, because he didn't want to do it the way he was so good at doing it. He wanted to just make these little gestures. And then he found this clever way of, you know, so many people cope with that in different ways.
Yeah.
So you could just ram the 20-second bits together.
That's sort of what I did.
Yeah, it is kind
but
of
I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because my 2 bands just broke the rules, you know, flamboyantly. And I wondered why, and why we didn't sooner. But I think I'd like the little gingerbread man that we deal with. And we just like sort of decorate him and until he can walk around.
But he has a will of his
Gingerbread
own.
men don't actually walk around. They just sit there until someone eats them, Kristin.
Well, that's the whole point.
Anybody else before we say goodbye?
Oh, there's one there.
What's that? I don't know what's happening.
Oh, David.
I've lost control of the room. The room has gone crazy. Since I've been wearing the nicotine patch quite a lot.
You want to take that, Kristin?
It works to reach the unconscious through dreams, certainly, but I feel like it's very difficult for all of us humans to tell what is the personal and what is the collective in that case. You end up writing dreams and publishing them, and some of those will move people very much because they needed to be born. Some of them were just for you, and you didn't know that. And it won't be beautiful and moving to people, and it won't become their soundtrack.
And there's also
my
no way to
experience.
tell which is which, probably.
That's what I mean, because
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
just as big to you.
Yeah.
So I personally stay away from dreams.
That's interesting. I have one song that I composed out of a dream.
Oh, a dream.
Woke up and it was done.
Well, I'm like...
Well, it only happened once.
Yeah.
So.
I have a friend who has incredibly boring dreams. And I'm afraid, you know, I'm kind of like him. It's like my dream would be, I heard him talk about this one day. He just said, and I had a dream very similar to it. In the dream, I'm thirsty. I get out of bed. I go to the sink. I turn on the tap. I put water in my glass. I drink it. And I go back to bed. That's what comes to me.
My husband dreams about the Blue Plate Special, the Chinese restaurant. I think it means you're self-actualized.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably does.
I had one line come to me from a poem that was in a dream, and it was a great line, and it goes, the line was, it was this really incredibly complicated dream, and then the line was, the infamy of America Bank is closing. The infamy of America Bank is closing. I thought,
Awesome.
Do you want it, or should I take it?
it's okay, I've already written my poem on it.
Dang.
Who wants to get sued? I was courting a young lady many years ago, and I wrote I wrote a little thing out of one of my dreams. She says, "That's the most romantic thing you've ever written to me, you know, by so far." And I was like, "Yeah," because there was no self-consciousness about it. I just let that cliche. I just wrote down that huge, cliched, stupid thought that was directly from a dream, because there was nothing in me going, "Oh, I think I can make that make sense or improve it." I just let it be this I remember what it was verbatim, and it's way too embarrassing to say. But, you know, that's what dreams are, isn't it? They're that bit where you haven't quite gone, let me smarten this up. Because you're just, in your head, you're going, okay, what's going to happen next in this dream?
Right.
That's what it always feels like.
I think
to me.
that's
What's happening next? What am I going to...
Right.
I've got to make, you know, I don't want to die here, so I better go over there.
Yeah, yeah.
You're a little out of control.
Very much so.
Yeah, yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
What you do for children, that kind of responsibility is often very sensuous. It's very beautiful and very necessary, and that's sort of what you're looking for. I tend to feed off of that, and I think songs and children are very similar in that I'm not supposed to tell them what to say. I'm just supposed to pour the cereal and put on the sweaters, and then they go, "Whoa," and, you know, that's pretty much what I do for songs. Just try to, stay out of control and yet be caring. That said, I don't sleep very much. I do a lot of work from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m.
I think you and I also kind of tend to both report on our children, as it were, more in our tweets for amusement factor than in our songs.
Children
if you know
are
what I mean.
Psychotic. They're
Yes,
great
they
for
are.
tweets.
Yeah, they are. Because that's all they can manage. It's like 140
They
characters.
don't have time to talk more than that.
Yeah. It's like the other day I asked my daughter what the name of the Beatles album was she loves the most, and I said it's Abbey. She went, Abbey Rosen?
Wow.
No, it's not your friend at school.
Right. Well, at least you didn't say Abby normal.
Tom, how about you? And you're a man with children.
Well, I have one.
You're a man with child.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't make sense.
No. I have a 16-year-old stepdaughter, and it gets better. I love the fact that she's 16, because she's just full of kind of lacerating irony directed at myself and the world, really. The other day, she was with a friend of hers, and the friend, they were walking down. She goes to this real kick-ass public school, and they were walking down the hall, and this friend said, "You know what I love about school? What I love about school is that as I walk down the hall, everybody knows me and loves me."
Yeah, I remember that from high school.
and so Hannah said, next time I'm with her, I'm going to walk down the hall, I'm going to say, "Hey," when she's with this girl, "you know what I love about school? What I love about school is walking down the hallway and everybody looks at me and loves me, and because you're with me, you get some attention too."
Ladies and
And
gentlemen.
they can't do that when they're 9 or 7.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank very much this afternoon David, Daniel, for bringing these great people here. Tom Sleigh, who's been fantastic this afternoon, and Kristin Hersh, one of our great songwriters. Please, thank you very much.